And I think we're on. Louise Fein, thank you so much for accepting this interview and also for giving us the chance to chat a bit about your novel, published also in Romania by Nemira Publishing House. So here we are in the presence of a World War II story, one that projects a doomed romance onto the dreadful landscape of Nazi Germany. Now, you embarked in this journey as a personal quest as well. What did you discover about yourself?
Well, as I explain at the end of the book, I'm not sure in the Romanian edition whether you get the author's note, but I was the product of the second marriage of my father. I was born when he was 61 and I was only 17 when he died. So he never really spoke about his past, and certainly not his life growing up in Leipzig. So for me, it was really to discover my roots and to connect with a past that I didn't know about. So that was the side of it, yeah.
I see. This is not a book about the actual Holocaust, but mostly about the late 30s and all the evolving historical events that led to the dreadful Kristallnacht. Why specifically this period of time?
Yeah, I wanted to really understand how a civilized nation like Germany arrived in such a horrific place as the Holocaust. A lot has been written about the death camps, about World War II, about the whole Holocaust, but not so much, I felt, about the lead up and what got there in just a few short years. So that was really how I wanted to what I wanted to explore. And the other issue was that most books focus on the victim, or the sort of the German that's dragged in reluctantly, as opposed to telling the story from the perspective of somebody brainwashed into Nazism. And that was really what I wanted to understand.
Now, you have mentioned a very interesting word, brainwashed. Do you think that this is what actually happened with a large percent of the German population in those times?
Yeah.
And how would you explain that? How would you explain this force of persuading a whole nation to follow some lunatic in the end?
Yeah. Absolutely, and in really a very short period of time.
Yes.
Well, Hitler was very much a lunatic, but he was also quite smart, because he focused on the young. And it was really a generation of young people that were brainwashed into propaganda and stories and promises of an amazing future, and the portrayal of the Jews as really the people that had ruined the nation. And it was a very cleverly sort of constructed story tale that the youth were being sold. And I think it's actually a lot easier than people may think to do that.
You have declared more than once that through this book you wanted to resolve bits of your family past that had some missing links. When did you start to get curious about your father's Jewish past?
Really, quite late. I think as a child growing up, it was never spoken about, and I think I just sort of felt it was something to hide, something not to be spoken of, something almost to be ashamed of in some way. And it was really, I think, around the time I got married, and I just wanted to, I suppose, just find out and come to terms with whatever it was that was sort of hidden away.
You have said that you are not grown up to be a religious person, and up to this book, you had no real perception about you being half Jewish. Has this book changed this to some extent?
I wouldn't say I'm religious any more than I was then. And
yes.
My father's family they were secular. They weren't at all orthodox or anything. And I suppose what it's done is it's made me embrace that part of me that I didn't know about, and to speak up about it in a way that I never did before.
The book is a love story between a Nazi-raised young woman and a Jewish man. The romance between them is also meant to make the real history in the background available to a larger audience.
Yeah, I think one of the powers of fiction is that it can emotionally engage a reader. So whereas if you learn about something in a dry, like in a classroom or a sort of a dry history, you don't connect emotionally, and that's what a love story can do. And I also wanted to understand what was almost more powerful than the fear, than the sort of the brainwashing that happened. And I think really that was the only thing really is love, and that can take many forms, not just romantic love. And actually in the book there is more love than just romantic love. There's the love between friends, between mother and daughter, between brother and sister. There's a lot of different kinds of love in the book. Even love for strangers, love for fellow human beings. So yeah, that was what I wanted to explore.
This is your first novel, and on your website you account the story of it being finally published. Not only that, but the book has been translated and published worldwide already. Now, give the aspiring writers a ray of hope in recounting this story.
Yeah, I mean, look, I went into this not thinking this book would ever see the light of day. It was going to be maybe shoved in a drawer. And I think it was just, and it wasn't an easy road. I sent it out, got lots of rejections. And I think if you're going to be an author, you have to come to terms with rejection. It's just part of the job. I think the people that succeed in the end are those ones that just keep going. And there was something inside me that wouldn't give up on this book. And I went through redraft after redraft, and you just have to keep going. It's a slow, it's not a fast business. Even from the time that you get a publishing deal to the time the book comes out, you're talking 18 months, sometimes longer. So you just keep on going, don't ever give up, and keep reading, keep revising your own work. That's my best.
Yes, you have also studied creative writing, and obviously for an innate talent, this somehow shapes all the tendencies, a certain stylistic approach. Then again, creative writing has its own limitation, or maybe its own patterns. Now, how do you balance between applying patterns that have been used over and over again, and also maintaining your own fresh personal voice?
I think there's a sort of a bit of a misconception with writing that a great writer is someone that just happens to be, and they can just sit down and write a book. But that's not true at all. I mean, everyone has to improve their craft. So if you think of a musician, you may be an incredibly talented musician, but you still have to practice. You still have still learn the craft of playing music. And you can't teach somebody a voice. You can't teach that. You can teach the techniques. You can teach better writing skills, but what you can't teach is your own unique voice, which is what is inside everybody. So that is something that is just there, or your own imagination is just there. You can't teach that part of it.
You write historical fiction. What would be the things to avoid or to fear when approaching this genre?
I think I think you should never be afraid of it. I know some people avoid it because they're afraid of all the research. You have to love research. You have to enjoy that side of it. But I think the thing to be careful of is not to be too... It's easy to be dragged down what we call rabbit holes. So you dig deeper and deeper about a certain subject. And then also trying to put too much of your research into the book. So I would say 95% of the research that I do doesn't go into the book. It's just there in the background, and it gives a flavor, and it gives you all the knowledge. But the most important thing is the story. So don't get too caught up in the research is my best advice, I think. And it's good. I think you don't have to be, you're not writing fact, so you don't have to be completely perfect and get every single detail right. I think it's important to get the main things right and the flavor of the time right. But you can use your imagination to fill in the gaps.
Do you have a favorite period in the history that you like to explore, to research on it, to document it, and then transform it or translate it into fiction? Your next novel, is it still going to be focusing on the eve of the 20th century?
So yeah, my second novel is set in the 1920s.
Okay.
And this one is set mostly in England, a little bit elsewhere, and it's not about the war. It focuses actually on eugenics, which started in England and America, really. And I think it's obviously it's easiest if you focus on a period of time, because for each book you have to do a lot of research. So I think I'm not going to suddenly start writing about the 15th century, but the book I'm currently working on is probably going to be focused mainly on the 1960s and the 1940s. So yeah, early 20th century, I would say.
Now, what books about the Nazi persecution, about the Holocaust, about the World War II did you find most inspiring and most touching?
Oh, there's so many, so many. But if we're talking fiction, I would say All the Light We Cannot See.
Oh, I love that book. It ranks among my very, very favorites. I totally love Anthony Doerr. Yes.
Brilliant book.
That is an amazing book.
Yeah. The Book Thief.
Yes. Is
also very good. Other ones. Alone in Berlin by Hans Fallada. Hans Fallada actually lived through the Nazi period and is a German, I think he's dead now, but he was a German writer, and he wrote about being there at the time, and you can really sense the fear and the control through fear through that book. I highly recommend that one. Yeah.
Now, a rather peculiar question, because as an author, you have to temporarily inhabit several characters, one more atrocious than the other. How do you cope with that?
Yeah, for this book, Hetty came to me very, very easily. She was fully formed, and I found her really easy to write. The father, much more difficult. He is, when I started writing him, he came out quite stereotypical, like a sort of, a heel-clicking Nazi from a bad movie.
Yes, yes.
And I had to bear in mind that everybody, even the bad guys, are heroes in their own world. So I had to make him as human as possible whilst also being an unpleasant character. So he took some rewriting. But there's another character in the book, Thomas, who is quite unpleasant. And actually, I enjoyed writing him because he's just a bit weird, and I found him quite fun to write. So I think you just have to inhabit them and try to get to know them and think from their perspective. Yeah.
Inhabit them, but in the same time also keeping some sort of a distance in order to observe them and also to transmit them to your readers.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. Because of course you're telling the story from your main character's perspective. So you've always got that in mind as well.
Now, talking about your main characters, about Hetty and Walter, for them, would there have been possible another ending? And we give no spoilers here, obviously.
So this has come up a few times with readers from different places. And all I can say without giving too much away is the ending had never changed. So I changed a lot of the book, but the ending was always that. And I felt it was
from the very beginning. You knew the ending from the very beginning.
I wrote the last chapter and I never really rewrote it.
Wow.
So that was always the way it was going to end. And I think I had to be fair to certain characters that I can't talk about. There's a bit of a hero in the book who I won't mention, but I wanted to be fair to her. And also I felt it was the most realistic ending as opposed to a sort of kind of Hollywood type ending, which I didn't feel was right.
The romance is obviously fictional, but the historical background is all true. How do you persuade your younger readers, those who cannot really relate to the horrors of war and persecution, that these events depicted happened and changed the world forever?
Well, I suppose in writing a book like this, the characters are quite young, so perhaps they can relate to those characters more than if it was about older people. And it's a story of young love, so again that would draw younger characters in and perhaps teach them the history in a more enjoyable way than simply studying a history book. And yes, all the facts, all the events in the book did happen. So, yes. So they are learning history at the same time.
Can fiction fight against violence, against discrimination, against hatred?
I like to think so. I think you pull in a much wider audience. And as I said before, by emotionally engaging people and telling a single story, I think sometimes that has more power than telling, just reading endless headlines and about people far away that you know nothing about and you're not emotionally engaged with. And I think that's really important. And to draw in a wider audience who may know nothing about those times and be able to relate it to perhaps things that they read about happening now and making them think about things in a way they didn't before.
Apart, obviously, wanting to know about a different view on the ending of the book, which is the main curiosity that springs up when you meet your different audiences across the globe?
Gosh, I think the ending, the ending has come up a lot, and also whether some people have asked whether the characters are real based on fact. Well, they're not. The actual story is fictional. A lot of people think it's my family story, which is slightly concerning. But yeah, I think how much is true and how much is fiction is probably one of the biggest questions.
As a rediscovered Jewish woman, are you paying now more attention to possible discrimination contexts?
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, I think I was already quite aware because I was brought up really in a way to watch out for things like that.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah, I think obviously my father, having been through what he did, he has always, or he was, very much of the mind of, you know, extremism in any form is bad, and we must, you know, just, we're all people and we must treat each other with respect and respect other people's views and their way of life. So I suppose that's always been in there. But yes, I'm definitely more aware, perhaps than I was before. Yeah.
And the final question, how did this book change you as a mother and as a wife?
You better ask my husband and children about that. I suppose one of the things, I don't know about as a wife, but one of the things that it did really make me think about was the way we speak to our children and what we teach our children, because at the end of the day, we're all brainwashed into a way of thinking by the way we're brought up, by the people around us. And I suppose I think much more carefully about the stories we tell and our values, and make sure that they're always aware of the way they speak as well, and how I suppose that's the biggest thing. In other senses, I suppose, being so stuck writing a book, I've maybe let some of the domestic things slide, so that they really focus on that. Always in my writing room.
Okay, Louise Fein, thank you so very much.
It's been such a pleasure. Thank you for.
Thank you.
Bye.